I'm gonna rank all 55 brawlers from worst to best. This is specifically for the competitive meta in Power League and Club League. And I wanted to give a huge thank you to these pro players for helping me make this tier list. We're gonna start with the F brawlers, in other words, the brawlers you should probably just not play. And just like the last tier list, we're starting with Penny. Unfortunately for her, this last update didn't help her at all, okay? Maybe it's just a lot harder to balance her than we thought, or maybe people just don't like playing her. Either way, she remains the worst brawler in the game at the moment. Next, and also in the F tier, is Edgar. Edgar actually didn't change since the last tier list very much either, okay? There's just too many abilities in the game that easily keep him outside of their range, and there's also a lot of abilities that can help deal with him even when he is able to land on them. Next, we have Bo, who is moving down from the C tier. Honestly, Bo's main attack is actually really good, but his super is way too easy to play around, okay? It is very strong if you're actually able to hit somebody with it, or if they don't know that it is there, but for the time being, he's in the F tier. Next in F tier is Jackie, who's also moving down from the C tier. Now, Jackie did get a buff to her Hardy Hard Hat star power, which was definitely necessary, but it definitely was not enough to make her very usable, at least when it comes to Power League and Club League. However, I will say that she's actually pretty good in the new payload game mode. And finishing off the F tier for us is Lou, who was also the best of the F tier in the last tier list. Lou's got decent range, decent main attack, strong super, but overall his stats just kind of lack in general. Honestly, I could see Lou being really strong if they had some sort of a buff or some sort of a rework to him, but for now, F tier suits him well. And with the 5 worst brawlers out of the way, let's move on to the C tier. These are brawlers that you should probably avoid picking, but there could be some playable situations on the right map, on the right mode, or with the right team comp. Just not very often, and there's usually better choices. And at the bottom of the C tier, we have Nita. Not much has changed for Nita since the last tier list, which is why her position isn't actually moving very much. She does have just a little bit of viability in the meta, and her bear paws can be a very big problem for a few brawlers. That being said, there's definitely better choices than her. And one of those slightly better choices is Shelley, who is remaining in the C tier. Shelley is good at one thing, and that is countering tanky brawlers. And because of that, she might be playable sometime if you know the enemy team is playing tanky brawlers, which does happen in Power League. However, there are anti-tanks that are even better, like Spike. So typically you don't want to go with Shelley unless the enemy team has 2 or even 3 tanks. Next is El Primo, who's actually moving up from the F tier. Honestly, right now he's kind of like a better version of Edgar, okay? His super is stronger and it allows him to hit a few shots right after hitting the enemy. However, he's not that much better than Edgar and still gets bullied plenty by lots of anti-tank brawlers. Next, we've got Colt, who is staying in the C tier. Colt actually has some of the highest damage in the game. However, he is a very difficult brawler to use because of the way that his attacks work, and also how easy it is to avoid his shots if you don't land that first shot at the very start. There are some people that are insanely good with Colt, but I think that the C tier is kind of where he belongs for right now. Next, we have BB, who is moving down from the B tier. Honestly, I wouldn't necessarily say that BB is just like that much worse than before, but there are a lot of other brawlers that have just gotten better. And more specifically, there are other tanks that are just better than she is. BB still has good health and she does a lot of damage, but there are better options at the moment. Next is Dynamite, who's staying in the C tier. Dynamite is the worst thrower in the game at the moment, okay? His shots are the hardest to hit, which is a really big flaw. He can deal a ton of damage if you're able to hit those shots, but unless you can't play Gromm, Sprout, Tick, or Barley for some other reason, I wouldn't recommend playing Dynamite at the moment. Up next, we have the B tier brawlers. B tier brawlers are kind of like the C tier brawlers, where they're good as counter picks or on specific maps and modes, but they're just a little bit better. Starting off the bottom of the B tier, we have Nani, who was in the B tier in the last tier list. Nani's actually really good on maps that are really open, but there aren't a lot of open maps in the competitive rotation right now, so she's not being played very much. That being said, she can be very good in knockout, so keep her in mind when that does come up. Next in the B tier, we have 8-Bit, who's moving up from the C tier. 8-Bit has really great range and one of the strongest attacks in the game. And he actually does a really good job at dealing with tanks as long as they don't get close to him, because he has a very slow movement speed, which really makes him struggle in those situations. And the reason why he's in the B tier is because he does rely on his teammates and also his super in order to deal with those tough situations. Next, we got Carl making his way up into the B tier. Carl's been in the C tier for a while, but he's finally moving up thanks to that attack range buff that he recently got. Carl's able to deal a lot of damage, but his super is kind of a little risky to use, at least for the offensive, which is why he's not like the best of the best, but he can be played right now, so keep him in mind. Next, we got Colette moving up into the B tier from the C tier, and a big reason for that is because she does such a good job at countering tanks, and we have a lot of very solid tanky brawlers up in the S and the A tier. Plus, she recently got her second gadget, which is just incredibly strong. Only pick her if you know the enemy team's going to be playing tanky brawlers, but if that happens, she can be really solid. Moving up into the B tier, we have Bull. Honestly, Bull hasn't actually changed very much. He's just kind of like the average of all of the tanks, okay? His super does help him catch enemies with a close range attack, but right now it's kind of tough to use it because of how many brawlers can actually like knock him back, stun him, slow him, or whatever while he's actually in the middle of it. Next, we have Gromm in the B tier, who has fallen from the #1 spot in the last tier list. He's had some major nerfs made to him, which has made him feel honestly a lot more just like standard and normal, which which is perfectly fine in my opinion. His main attack is way harder to use at close range, and it's actually a little bit easier at long range, but on top of that, his super range is a lot less, which means you actually have to aim it, which is honestly, I feel like much better. Gromm feels better now. Next in the B tier and remaining in the B tier is Poco. Honestly, I don't think Poco's ever just going to be a bad brawler because he's such a good healer. That being said, there are other brawlers like Byron or Pam who are just better right now, so keep them in mind. Next in the B tier and staying in the B tier is B. Now, B is a very good long range brawler and she's a very good counter against tanks, but there are both better long range brawlers and better anti-tank brawlers in the meta right now. So she's kind of like a safe choice, but where people are drafting in Club League and Power League, she's being played a lot less right now. Next in the B tier, we have Amber, who is not moving from the last tier list. Now, Amber's attack and her super deal a lot of damage over time, but where we have a lot of strong tanks and healers in the current meta, Amber's slow reload speed means that she's just not always the best option. Next, we have Jessie, who is staying in the B tier from the last tier list. Jessie's a solid choice. She's not the best. However, she is a really good choice if you're going to be playing against enemies that have spawns or turrets that you know you're going to be able to bounce your shots off of. Otherwise, there are better options, especially if the enemy team has a Belle who can bounce her shots off of Jessie's turret. Next, we got Squeak, who's moving up from the C tier. Squeak's one of those brawlers that I think when he was first released, people were like, nah, I don't really know how to use him, and so they just didn't. They kind of slept on him. But as more and more people have learned how to use him to control specific areas, he's become a pretty solid option in gem grab and hot zone. I personally find that there are a lot of better options. However, the pros have spoken that he is better than I considered him to be. Next, we have Max, who is staying in the B tier from the last tier list. Max is another one of those brawlers that I see her just being very solid a lot of the times because she's always going to be able to help out her teammates. And she did receive a decent buff, but it doesn't seem to be enough to really help her out. So she's still just like a above average in the B tier. Next to B tier, we have Frank, who's moving down from the A tier. When anybody looks at Frank, they immediately think of a tank. And because of that, they're likely to pick some sort of an anti-tank brawler, okay? As other tanks have become kind of strong right now in the competitive meta, that means that people are very quickly to jump onto like Spike or even Terra or Ems, which just makes playing Frank a little bit tricky right now. Next, we got Mortis, who is going down from the A tier. Mortis didn't actually have any changes to him, but the thing is there's a lot of brawlers that are very good, strong, close range brawlers in the meta at the moment. And a lot of the times Mortis isn't able to out DPS them, which means that he gets shut down. Next in the B tier, we have Sprout. Sprout's moving down from the A tier since the last tier list, and that is because it really struggles against those close range brawlers that are easily able to close the gap, like Fang or Buzz. It still has some viability in the right map or mode, but it's just not as competitive as it used to be. Next, we have Jean, who is not moving and is staying in the B tier. Jean's super is obviously very good, especially in gem grab. However, there are a lot of strong brawlers that he does not want to pull at the moment in the meta, like Fang, right? And because he struggles to deal a lot of damage to them from a distance, he's just not the best at the moment. Next, we have Griff, who is staying in the B tier. That's right, Griff is staying in the B tier even after he got those buffs to his attack damage. He is higher in the B tier since the last tier list because he does an okay job of dealing with tanks. Plus, this guy's just really good at getting rid of walls, but he's still just kind of like average at the moment. Next, we have Barley in the B tier. Now, in the last tier list, Barley was actually at the bottom of the B tier, and he's kind of close to the top of the B tier right now. There are a lot of brawlers with abilities that do counter Barley at the moment, but the new map rotation actually kind of favors him a fair amount. And because of that, he's actually becoming somewhat of a viable option. And on those maps that favor Barley, he's actually really solid. Next, we have Serge, who's staying in the B tier. As always, Serge is like the worst at level 1 and like S tier at level 4. So it kind of comes down to his ability to charge his super and stay alive. And he's only really amazing on maps and modes and against the right brawlers that make it easy for him to do that. Next in the B tier, we have Mr. P. In the last tier list, Mr. P was almost the worst brawler in the game. However, he had one of the biggest buffs out of all of the brawlers since the last tier list, which has made him incredibly viable and honestly kind of annoying. In fact, it was actually a pretty tough decision between putting him in the B tier and the A tier, so kind of at the top of the B tier makes a lot of sense. But there's still one brawler more annoying than Mr. P, and that is going to be Tick, who is at the top of the B tier. And the reason why Tick is moving from like the middle of the B tier into the top of the B tier is because Knockout was added into the game mode, and Tick is very good in Knockout. He's got good range and he's got good area control, but he is very squishy, so he sucks at being the last brawler alive, but he's really good when all of his teammates are still there. On top of that, his super also helps him deal with close range brawlers, which with the exception of Spike, if you count Spike a thrower, I think that makes Tick the best thrower at the moment. Up next, we got the A tier brawlers. A tier brawlers are very well rounded and are usually always good in pretty much any map or mode. They're just not quite as good as the S tier brawlers. Starting off the A tier, we have Colonel Ruffs. Colonel Ruffs is moving up from the B tier for a very good reason. He recently got an attack damage buff, and it kind of makes him feel like a brand new brawler. A big part of this is that he's able to handle 1v1 situations much better, but once he gets his super charged up, his damage is insane. And using his super to buff a teammate's damage when they have a lot of damage output, more than Colonel Ruffs, that's even better. Moving down from the S tier, we have Meg. Honestly, there were a lot of arguments to say that Meg was the best brawler in the game until she got a supercharge rate nerf. She's still a very good brawler because of how powerful her mecha is, but she isn't used as much and isn't quite S tier anymore. Next is Brock, who's moving up from the B tier. Just like Mr. P, one of Brock's star powers was added to his kit and he received an entirely new star power, and this made Brock way better at dealing damage and also controlling areas, which honestly makes him very solid for pretty much any game mode. Also moving up from the B tier, we have Ems. Not only has Ems risen up because of the popularity of really strong, powerful tanks, but she recently got a second gadget that allows her to attack through walls, which is incredibly strong. Plus, she already has a decent range to be able to deal with a lot of the strong, like, meta brawlers at the moment. Next, we have Buzz, who's staying in the A tier from the last tier list. Honestly, there aren't very many brawlers that can dish out more burst damage than he can, at least not as fast as he can or before he's able to take them out. He does require a little bit of patience in order to charge up his super without actually dying, but if you're willing to play him like that, then he can be used on pretty much any map. Next, we have Rosa, who's moving down from the S tier. She's still a very solid option, and she definitely gets to use her speed gear a lot more effectively than any of the other brawlers in the game. However, with the speed gear getting a little bit of a nerf and people picking brawlers that are good at countering tanks, she just isn't quite as overpoweringly strong as she used to be. Next, we have Lola, who is staying in the A tier. Lola's attack deals a lot of damage. She has good range, and she's actually pretty easy to use because of how wide her attack pattern is. The super damage isn't as strong as it used to be, but it still does a lot of damage. Plus, her shield gadget is incredibly strong. She also got a new star power that allows her to switch places with her ego. However, it seems like it's not quite as strong as I initially thought it was going to be. Also staying in the A tier, we have Belle. Belle is just a very solid, well-rounded brawler. She has range, she has damage, plus her super does allow her to somewhat deal with tanks. Not immediately, but the tanks will take additional damage, which is really solid. So as long as the map is somewhat open, she's going to be a good choice. Up next, and also staying in the A tier, is Piper. Yes, Piper struggles more than Belle does at close ranges, and no, her attack doesn't bounce off of other brawlers like Belle's does, but she can jump away from tanks. She does also have the gadget that kind of pushes people away, which is really good, and her attacks can deal so much burst damage, which is very useful, especially when you have a lot of healers in the meta. Also staying in the A tier, we have Sandy. Sandy's just a very well-built brawler. His super is strong, his attacks deal a fair amount of damage, his gadget allows him to stun people for a little bit, which is just ridiculous. Plus, it's all tied nicely together with the fact that he can turn his entire team invisible. He's just a very solid, well-rounded brawler on pretty much any map or mode, and pretty much any comp as long as the enemy team doesn't outrange him too well. Next, and staying in the A tier, is Tara. Now, Tara recently got a nerf to her attack damage. However, it's actually not moving her down at all because what really makes her strong is her super. Now, if there weren't a lot of really strong close range brawlers that needed to be pulled away at the last second, then yeah, maybe Tara wouldn't do as well, but she really thrives because that's exactly what's happening right now. Next, we have Gail, who is moving up from the B tier. Now, Gail's always been a really good job at countering brawlers that are close range or are tanky because he can just blow them away. But even more important than that is the fact that he got a buff to his blustery blow star power. That extra half a second added to his stun duration is the difference for Gail being like somewhat okay to being actually a very solid option. Next, we have Rico, who is staying in the A tier. Obviously, your best bet for Rico is to play him on maps where he has a lot of walls that he can bounce his shots off and that he can heal a lot of with his bouncy castle star power or gadget. Lucky for Rico, that's a lot of the maps in Club League and Power League at the moment, which makes him very strong, especially because he can deal so much damage against tanky healing brawlers, which we face a lot of right now. And speaking of tanky healing brawlers, we've got Pam, who is staying in the A tier. Pam's this weird brawler where she's not the best healer, she's not the best damage dealer, she's not the best at dealing with tanks, she can't stun people. If you leave her alone just like that, she's just fine. However, when you have a teammate that has a lot of HP that really benefits from her slow healing, she's very strong. And one of those brawlers who really benefit from her is Daryl, who is moving down from the S tier. And the reason why he's moving down is because of his recent nerf. However, he is still one of the best brawlers in the game because of how much damage he can deal and because he has that really strong shield while he is rolling. That shield is insane. And finally, we have our S tier brawlers. These brawlers are just insane right now. Play them on pretty much any map or mode with any team comp, and these are the brawlers that you're typically going to have people trying to counter because they're just so good. Now, Leon's actually moving up from the A tier since the last tier list. He's one of these brawlers that are able to get really close to enemies and deal a ton of damage and burst them down without any chance for them to actually react to him. But unlike Ash or Daryl or Fang, he's actually able to to deal a fair amount of damage at a distance. Next in the S tier, moving up from the A tier, is Crow. And this is because of Crow's insane ability to counter the new meta. He can slow down tanks with his gadget and cut their healing in half, which totally shuts down some of the best strategies right now. You have to know how to play him, and you have to play him against the right brawlers. But Crow is one of the best brawlers at countering the meta comps at the moment. And next we have Stu, who is moving up from the A tier. Stu is one of those brawlers who's really hard to master, but at a high level of gameplay, he is definitely S tier, which means that we've got to put him here because we are talking about the competitive tier list for Club League and Power League. And starting our top 5 countdown in the S tier, we have Fang. Fang was already a really amazing brawler. His super allows him to play very well against a lot of brawlers that, you know, struggle to do a lot of damage. I mean, he just has so much burst potential. He's insanely good. But if you add a roundhouse kick gadget that can stun enemies onto his kit, he becomes insanely good. Like ridiculously overpowered, okay? I don't think I need to say anything else. Top 5 best brawler right now, Fang. And the 4th best brawler in staying in the S tier is Spike. Spike can do everything. He can burst enemies down really fast, especially if they try and roll up on him. He can heal with his gadget. He can control and slow an area. Plus, his attacks have one of the longest range projectiles in the game. He's just insanely good. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that Supercell hasn't nerfed him already. Next, we have Eve starting in the S tier as the 3rd best brawler in the game. Now, it's been a couple of weeks since I first started working on this tier list video. And when I first started, a lot of the pro players had not unlocked Eve yet. I kind of like had them start working on this as soon as I possibly could. However, Eve is ridiculously good. She's insane. Her main attack can deal so much damage over an incredibly long distance. Plus, that big egg from the projectile is so large, it's almost impossible for you to miss your shots if you're like at least somewhat decent at the game. On top of that, her hatchlings do soak up a lot of enemy ammo. They don't necessarily deal a lot of damage, but soaking up that ammo just makes her insanely good. And on top of that, she has that gadget that allows her to like jump away from anybody that tries to jump on her, like a Fang or a Daryl or a Stu or something like that. So honestly, she's just insane. She's great. And the 2nd best brawler right now has to go to Byron. Byron is definitely the best healer in the game right now. His range is very far. He can deal damage with his attacks and he can heal with his attacks. And his melee star power completely shuts down other healers and really puts the hurt on anybody that gets hit by his super. Not to mention the fact that his new gadget is way better than I first initially thought it was. It is by far the go-to gadget for Byron pretty much every time. It's so hard for you to miss your shots with it. Plus, you can burst heal and burst deal a lot of damage if anybody does end up actually getting really close to Byron. He's insane and a must pick pretty much all the time at the moment. Just not quite as insane and must pick as Ash is. Number 1 best brawler in the game right now. Let's hear it for Ash. Even after his new gadget got nerfed, he still has tons of health and no problem charging up his rage and playing aggressive. Now, his new gadget is going to be the go-to option if he has any type of healer on his team. Specifically, an Ash with the Byron is just ridiculously strong at the moment. Absolutely needs some sort of a nerf. Probably both of the brawlers do, but I'm not going to say so. And like, no, I just said so. So hopefully Supercell's paying attention or not paying attention. I don't know what you guys want right now. But if he's not playing with a healer on his team, he can go with his chill pill gadget instead, which is just going to heal him up so much. And just Ash, man. If Ash is able to push up the map and stay alive with his rage bar full, it's almost impossible for you to get him out of your spawn point, which is what makes him so strong. And that is every brawler ranked from worst to best. I learned from you guys' feedback, and Penny is the worst, Ash is the best. This is the correct order that it should have been in the last tier list. And I wanted to give once again a huge thank you to the pro players that helped me make this tier list right here. Thank you guys so much for your time and cooperation. This tier list was formatted a lot different than a lot of my previous tier lists where I used to go over every single game mode and every single meta for each individual game mode. You guys gave me a lot of feedback that you would rather have a tier list like this, even if it meant I didn't go over the specific game modes, if it meant that I was able to release a tier list more frequently. Please let me know if your feedback is any different or if you want me to continue releasing tier lists like this on a more frequent basis. Either way, make sure you guys subscribe for more content in the future for Brawl Stars, and also we got Clash Mini and Free Fire content right there, not to mention this wonderful Brawl Stars video that you guys have got to check out. Make sure you guys use code Kairos in Brawl Stars shop to support your support, and for now, this is KairosTime ticking by, and we will see you in Brawl Stars.